My name is Danielle Boyd, and I am 34 years old. Last March, on a day I will never forget, I stepped into the library that had belonged to my great-grandmother. I expected to find the walls lined with history and stories, with the kind of quiet magic that room had always carried. Instead, I found 217 empty shelves. The sight made my heart drop straight to the floor. My 10-year-old daughter, Ivy, was still sitting out in the car, finishing up a turkey sandwich. I had told her to wait just a minute while I ran inside to grab something. But when I got in there was nothing left for me to take. The room still held that wonderful old smell I had loved my entire life. Aged paper, soft leather, and the beeswax polish we used on the wood. But now that beautiful scent had nowhere to live, because the books were gone. What I did over the next 9 days did not require me to raise my voice even once, and yet it ended up costing my parents the very house they had lived in for 31 years. When I finally said the words that made my mother drop her coffee cup, 3 of the neighbors were standing right there, capturing everything on their phones. To understand what happened, you first need to know about a very special woman named Cordelia N. Boyd. She was my great-grandmother, and she was a true pioneer in our family. She was the first woman among us to attend a major university, enrolling back in 1956 to study English literature. She was also, as it turned out, the last person in our family line who truly believed that books were sacred things, worthy of protecting with the same care you would give a living creature. She came from money that traced back to a family jewelry business, which she sold in 1981. For the next 27 years, she devoted her time, her heart, and a considerable portion of her wealth to seeking out rare and antique children's books. She tracked down volumes with original illustrations from the early 20th century, award-winning stories printed in the 1930s, and even a book from 1896 pressed onto handmade paper that still felt soft under your fingertips. She acquired 3 handwritten letters from Beatrix Potter herself. By the time she was done, she had assembled 217 items in total. Every single one was carefully cataloged, appraised by experts, and arranged on the shelves of the family house in a small Vermont town. In 2008, when Cordelia was 81 years old, she did something deliberate and thoughtful. She established a private foundation, officially recognized by the government as a charitable preservation organization, and she transferred ownership of the entire collection to it. The books remained physically in the family house under what was legally called a permanent loan, which meant they stayed where they had always lived, but they belonged to the foundation and could not be touched without its authority. Because the books were housed there, the property received a significant cultural preservation tax benefit, roughly $30,000 a year in property tax savings for my parents. But the arrangement came with rules that were not suggestions. The books had to remain in the house. They could never be sold, and they were to be passed down within the family, according to Cordelia's specific wishes. 2 years before she passed away, Cordelia added one final and very personal instruction to those rules. She named my daughter, Ivy, as the sole rightful heir to the collection. Ivy was only 6 years old at the time. Cordelia sat her down in a large, old wooden chair beside the library window, opened a green leather-bound copy of The Wind in the Willows, and told her, "These are yours now, sweetheart." Inside every book in the collection, Cordelia had placed a small bookplate sticker that read, "For Ivy, who will keep them safe." Every time Ivy opened one of those books, she would find that sticker and run her finger across the words. It was her private ritual, her quiet way of saying hello to her great-grandmother across whatever distance separated them. For years, our Saturday routine was sacred. Every week, I would drive Ivy to the family house, and she would go straight to the library. She would lift her favorite book, that green copy of The Wind in the Willows, with both hands, even though it was light enough to carry with one. She treated it as though it were made of something more precious than paper. She would settle into that giant wooden chair and read, or simply sit, while the afternoon light came through the old window. She did this every week for 3 years without interruption. My mother had been restless about the collection for well over a year before everything fell apart. It began with small, pointed comments. At Thanksgiving dinner, she announced that those books were just sitting there collecting dust in that old room. Ivy, who was 9 at the time, looked at my mother for a long, quiet moment and then returned her plate without saying a word. She already understood what my mother was circling around. After that, my mother raised the subject regularly, suggesting that my sister's children could make better use of the library as a playroom. Each time, I told her the same thing. The books were not mine to give away. They belonged to Ivy, and no one had the right to move them. My mother would respond with a tight, closed smile that told me she believed I was wrong and that eventually she would prove it. What I did not fully appreciate at the time was that my mother's frustration was not purely about money, though money was certainly part of it. Cordelia had left the house and the collection to me and to Ivy, skipping my mother entirely. After 31 years of living in that house as her primary residence, my mother had not been named in the will, not in the way she felt she deserved. That wound never healed. Over time, it quietly transformed into something harder and more purposeful. The warning signs were there, and I missed them. One evening, I came across a post from my brother-in-law, Brent, asking online where a person might go to sell rare and valuable antique children's books. I registered it as odd, but told myself it was probably a coincidence. That was my first mistake. Then, just before Ivy and I left for a 9-day camping trip in a location with no cell phone reception, I had a feeling, almost like a voice at the back of my mind, something that felt like Cordelia herself, telling me to make sure everyone remembered those books belonged to Ivy. I thought about calling my mother before we left. I decided against it because I did not want the argument. That was my second mistake. While we were away, my mother sent me a text message saying she had things handled. I did not see it until we returned. Looking back, that word, handled, should have told me everything. It was a language of a completed task, not a favor being done on my behalf. When Ivy and I stopped at the house on our way home, I walked into the library and found the shelves bare. 217 spaces, each one outlined in a thin layer of undisturbed dust where a book had stood. On the seat of the old wooden chair was a piece of paper, an invoice from a dealer in New York City. My father had arranged the sale. My mother had been present for all of it. The collection had gone for $165,000. The money had already been spent, or was in the process of being spent, on a home theater for my sister's children, wraparound speakers, 6 oversized leather reclining chairs, a popcorn machine shaped like a red fire hydrant. Ivy walked into the room behind me, took in the empty shelves, and walked back out without crying. She did not need to. She already understood exactly what had happened. My parents arrived home later that day and behaved as though nothing unusual had occurred. My mother was wearing new gold earrings. When I asked her where the books were, she told me she had done everyone a favor because the books were only collecting dust. She spoke about the home theater with genuine enthusiasm, pleased with how the room would look, pleased with herself. I did not raise my voice. I took Ivy and we left. That night, I opened a folder of documents that I had kept since Cordelia first established the foundation. Buried in the legal language of the foundation's governing agreement was a clause called a recapture provision. It stated that if anyone sold or disposed of the collection without the express written authorization of the foundation, the full value of all tax benefits received since 2010 will become immediately recoverable by the government, with substantial financial penalties added on top. When I ran the numbers with Cordelia's oldest friend, Evelyn, who served as the foundation's director, she confirmed that the total obligation came to more than $400,000. Because my parents owned the house and had been the direct beneficiaries of the tax savings tied to collection, the government would be entitled to place a lien on the property. A lien, in practical terms, meant the house could not be sold, refinanced, or transferred until the debt was resolved. In almost every case like this, the only way to resolve it was to sell the property itself. I drove to New York the following week to meet the dealer who had purchased collection, a man named Mr. Howaren. He was not what I had expected. He was thoughtful and careful, and when he understood the full picture of what he had inadvertently acquired, property that had never legally been available for sale, he did not hesitate. When he watched Ivy pick up the wind in the willows and trace her finger across the bookplate sticker the way she always had, the way Cordelia had taught her, he made his decision quietly and completely. He agreed to return every item in the collection. My sister and my mother left me voicemails during that period that were difficult to listen to. They said I was tearing the family apart over a pile of old books. They said I was being spiteful and dramatic. What they did not say, because they could not honestly say it, was that they had done nothing wrong. They knew exactly what those books meant and exactly whose they were. On the day my sister was hosting a gathering to celebrate the new home theater, guests invited, refreshments prepared, I arrived at the house with a lawyer. I stood in front of everyone present and read from the legal documents clearly and without embellishment. I explained what the recapture clause meant, what the foundation's rules required, what my parents had set in motion when they sold the collection, and what it would cost them. The room went completely silent. My mother let her coffee cup fall. Ivy stood beside me, and at some point she turned to her aunt and said, simply and without malice, "You didn't buy this theater. My books did." In time, all 217 books came back. They are now housed in a dedicated room at the local library, properly insured, cataloged, and protected. Ivy visits them regularly. My parents sold the house and moved into a small apartment. They are still paying back what they owe in monthly installments and will be for some time. I do not tell this story because I am proud of what it cost my parents. I tell it because Ivy deserved to have someone stand between her and the people who were willing to take something irreplaceable from a child. Setting a boundary with your own family is one of the hardest things a person can do, and it does not mean you have stopped loving them. It means you have chosen to protect something more important than the comfort of keeping the peace. If you ever find yourself in a position where the right thing and the easy thing are pointing in opposite directions, I hope you will remember that quiet, steady action can carry more weight than anything you might say in anger